So about Peter. Peter is a startup entrepreneur, founder, and executive with over 20 years of experience in developing and scaling hardware-based products. He's led teams through product development process, starting from initial market evaluation and the voice of customer definition through concept selection, prototype and validation into initial product launch and scale up. Drawing on his experience working with Fortune 500 companies, Peter's adopted proven process and strategies to achieve focus and success in a dynamic, agile, and quite frankly, tough startup environment. Recently, has specialized in clean tech and climate tech, working with notable players like eSolar, Heliogen, and carbon capture. So Peter, without much further ado, I'll invite you to please take it away.
All right, thank you. So that pretty much nails the intro on me. I love hardware, I love making things, and I love deploying things to the field. So that's been my interest my whole career. And so today I'm excited to talk about manufacturing for startups. And there's a lot of special things that are specifically related to startups. And how I'm going to talk through this topic is to highlight some of the most common pitfalls that I've seen that startups fall into. And we'll talk a little bit about how to avoid them. So let's see, how do I advance slides? There we go. So the first thing I want to say, hardware is hard. We've all heard that. I'm sure you've heard that. Why do people say hardware is hard? Well, first of all, this is not software development. There's no patches or hot fixes that you can just push to all the users. If you need to make changes, it's people going to the field, making fixes on a piece of hardware, potentially deploying new components into that hardware. The other part, another reason hardware is so hard, it's very capital intensive and it's slow. The development timelines for hardware is longer. And when I say capital intensive, what that translates to is it uses a lot of cash, So you go and you raise money as a startup and you have this runway. Hardware uses a lot of that cash. Another thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but COGS and price are disconnected. So what is COGS? Cost of goods sold. That's what your product costs you. And then there's price. Those two things, even though we'd love them to be related, they are completely unrelated. You've got price, what does the market pay for your product? What will they pay for your product? And then the cost is what you have to pay to get it made. And you're hoping as a hardware company that that's lower than the price so you can make some profit. So that's really tough. And in general, all this kind of boils down to manufacturing, making these things, and mistakes in manufacturing burns capital. It jeopardizes your chances of success in a startup. And so let's talk through some of the pitfalls that I've seen that you could identify and potentially avoid as you scale up your hardware startup. All right, so the first one is no customer discovery. So this is when the founders have this mindset of, I've got this idea, this invention, it's so awesome, everybody's gonna love it. And they don't really spend a lot of time investigating the market, who's gonna buy it, things like that. So, why is this a pitfall? Well, first of all, customer feedback after deployment is really expensive and slow to integrate into your product. So you've already deployed physical hardware. If there's some feature that they wanted that's not there, you have to wait till next generation. You can't just push a new feature drop like you can with software. Another part of it is that often it's oversimplified. So the whole product market channel map isn't well understood. So what do I mean by that? Well, often people know who their customer is, or they have an idea of who their customer is. It's that person that's probably going to use their product. But there's a lot more to it than the person who uses the product when you're figuring out what does the market need from your product. And as an example, you might need to sell it through a special distributor. There might be a separate person who buys it from the person who uses it. These are some examples, but in general, not understanding that is a big pitfall. Now, one of the things I have noticed is if you are involved with a program like this, like Founders University, StartUpNV has a lot of other great programs. Customer discovery is a big part of that. So this is often really driven into startup. So I bring it up first, but it's probably one of those things that is covered a lot in programs associated with organizations like StartUpNV. Another thing I'll note, by the way, is that each of these topics I'm going to talk about today, I could probably do a half-hour talk on each one. So we might be a little superficial, we might be going a little fast. So just know that these are basic overviews. I'm highlighting these common pitfalls. All right, so how could we avoid this pitfall? All right, so like instead, let's try for really brainstorming. Who uses this product? Who buys this product? Who sells this product? Who ships this product? Those are all things, those people sort of collectively make up a customer, even though, you know, you might have that one type of person that is the intended customer. Everyone has requirements that are hung on this product, and you really need to map that all out and then go interview as many of those different types of people as you can. Usually you remember the customer, like that person who uses the product you're making, but don't forget those other people. Super brief example, I worked with a company a while back. We were selling a product intended for the commercial solar market. Our first idea of the customer were people who own the buildings that the solar goes on top of. But at the end of all of our customer discovery and planning, we realized really it's solar developers that decide what solar equipment to use. So it's just a quick example of, you initially might have an idea of who the customer is, but once you map it all out and you really talk to each of those different types of people, you're going to get a good understanding of who's decision makers, who has requirements, and things like that. All right, so the next topic is prototype cost anxiety. So this is the next pitfall. I've seen this happen many times. So here's what happens. You're a founder, you've just made the first prototype of your product, of this thing. Let's say it's a complete prototype, and you have major sticker shock. It costs maybe 10 times, 5 or 10 times what you thought it was going to cost. And it sends you into a panic. And this thought that goes through your head is, we're never going to be profitable. I'm never going to be able to sell this thing and make a profit at the price that the market will bear. And some of the reactions I've seen from falling into this are they pivot away from a concept. So instead of continuing to work with that concept, they say, this concept that we picked is never going to be profitable. We need to go back to the drawing board. And they go back to a new concept selection. By the way, when you design something, you learn all of its drawbacks, all of its deficiencies, all of its challenges. When you have something on a concept table, you don't know all that. So there's a big draw to going back to the drawing board and picking another concept, because the other concepts all seem really great because you don't know enough about them yet. So it's a big risk. All right, another thing that I've seen is people see that first cost and they start planning, and these next 2 points are somewhat related. They start planning a massive vertical integration. So the only way this is ever going to be profitable is if we build a gigantic factory and we do every single manufacturing operation in-house, so we can take all of those markups that all the different suppliers would have charged and take them out, and then we'll have a profitable product. Or similar thinking, the only way this is going to be profitable is if I invest in high volume tooling so I can get really good unit costs, or I invest in a bunch of automation, I need to take all the labor out of it. All right, so these are the kinds of thinking that I've seen when they see that first cost. Why are these problems? Well, pivoting away is a separate problem. You're losing time. If you pivot away and you didn't need to, you've just lost time. Time equals runway equals cash. So you're wasting cash. Massive vertical integration. If you're a startup, you are not going to be able to run as efficient an operation as existing suppliers. I can almost guarantee it. Maybe someday you will, when you're in a growth round, way, way later. But initially, you won't be able to do it. Or investing in high volume tooling. That costs a lot of money. Maybe there's exceptions to everything I'm saying, but for the most part, you want to use manufacturing processes that are appropriate to the volumes that you're making. All right, so let's talk about What should we do instead? All right, so we see that price, we're panicked. First thing we do, and this is probably an obvious one, and that's why I use this carefully caveat, get volume pricing from suppliers, carefully. All right, this one is hard to do. It sounds easy. Let's say you have this widget that you're making, it's to your own print, right? You've designed it. And you've ordered one or two from a supplier. And then you go to them and say, hey, what's this gonna cost at 1,000, 10,000, and 1,000,000? You're not gonna get pricing from them. They won't even know how to price that because they're in the business of making onesie, twosie units. So the other problem with this is that you can really alienate and or fatigue your suppliers by asking for lots and lots of quotations that you have no intention of buying on in the near term. So where does this work? Volume pricing for custom design things, it's going to be really hard to get that from suppliers before you've ordered significant amounts from them. But for commercial off-the-shelf things, you might be able to do it. So if, like, let's say you're buying a motor that's, you know, a product, a catalog product, that you really might be able to get 10,000, 100,000, million unit pricing because they already know the pricing schedule for those things. So it's easy for them to give it to you. If you have a custom part and you ask for 1,000,000 quantity pricing, they have to go off and do a manufacturing engineering project to even figure that out. And they won't do it for you, frankly, because they don't know if you're ever going to order it. You've only ordered a couple. So what's the next thing we got to do? Perform a should cost analysis. It should also include volume discounting. So this is tricky. It's something that people like myself, like a lot of manufacturing engineer consultants can do for you. It's effectively like making your own quote for your own part. You go through, you analyze the manufacturing processes, you understand what labor rates are for the region that you're going to be making it in. You understand that there's some profit that the manufacturing company is going to expect. You know what materials cost, and you go in and you calculate what this thing should cost. This is a really good way. You can also use volume discount curves. It's price for volume pricing kind of works on log scales. So there are ways to estimate what something will cost when you order 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, million. The other thing is start DFMA, design for manufacturing and assembly projects. So that's really a good thing to do. Instead of panicking and saying, we got to go back to the drawing board, look at the whole BOM of your bill of materials for everyone playing the home game. Look at the whole costed BOM and target the top 10% highest cost items and start design for manufacturing and assembly projects on those items. So those are some things, those are some tips for this pitfall. All right, so the next topic is the over deployment of hardware. This is a pitfall. Not everybody is able to do this, but I have seen it happen where you have a startup, you've got an unusually high demand for the product, which I have seen. You've got a decent sales force that you've started, and you just get into this mode of we have to sell as many as we can of this thing. It seems like it's a desirable thing. You're going to show all these sales and all this revenue, but what happens is you have too many units sold too early. And when I say too early, it's too early a design. It's too early of a version of your design. Why is this a problem? Because you're going to have product failures. And so the cost of repair and overhaul is going to be a significant use of capital. So then not to skip over this last one, you can have a major customer perception problem. So you over deployed, you had a bunch of product failures, and you get a whole bunch of very unhappy customers right at the beginning. That's something you don't want. Cost of repair and overhaul using too much capital. Let's talk about that really quickly. So as you can see, I keep coming back to using your cash, because your cash is your runway, is how long you have to hit those milestones you need to do to get to your next round. Using that up reduces your chances of success. So you sell a lot of an early version product. What happens? First of all, that first design probably has a lot of flaws in it. And so you're going to have this cost to go out and fix the product, especially if you had a warranty. Second, that first version of the product is probably too expensive. Remember, we talked about costs of goods sold. It's probably too high. You might even be upside down for those first products you're selling. So you don't want to sell too many of an early product. So what do we do instead? All right. This is a strategy I like to talk about. It's really a rough suggestion. So don't take it too literally. I'm not literally talking about 1, 10, 100,000. What I'm saying is you want to step out your product rollout in order of magnitude jumps. And the reason I think that's important is because manufacturing difficulty, if you're just thinking of it on a conceptual level, is really this log scale kind of thing. So it's just as hard to go from 1 to 10 as going from 10 to 100 and 100 to 1,000. Okay, so roughly speaking. So that's the best way to plan a product rollout. So your quantity 1 is your first version, your prototype. Your quantity 10s is probably your like super early adopter rollout. And your quantity 100 is now early sales and so on and so forth. But notice I say first design iteration, second design iteration, third design iteration. What you want to make sure is with this stepped rollout that there is some period of time, and I don't know how long that is, and it depends on your company and your product, but there's some period of time where you can react to things you learn from making that first that iteration and roll those improvements into that second iteration. Because what you're doing is you're improving the quality of the product with every step, but you're keeping those chunks manageable. So if you do run into a problem, it's a manageable thing to go solve. And yeah, the last thing is scaling manufacturing. So each iteration reduces risk. I just mentioned that. You're cutting that repair and overhaul cost, which can burn a lot of capital. But the scaling manufacturing before design is ready, that's a key one. So let's say you do your first version and then your second version and then your third version. By then you've made a bunch of changes to your design. Let's say instead you had said, I need to do high volume tooling, like injection molded plastic tools, which can be, you know, per part, 20, 30, 50 grand. By that third iteration, you have all these changes. That tool may not be useful anymore. So the whole point is use low volume manufacturing strategies for those early rollouts, make your product learnings, and then you're ready for those higher volume manufacturing processes. All right, I'm moving right along here. Time flies by when you're talking. It's amazing. All right, the next pitfall, full manufacturing site too early. This is a little bit redundant with some of the things I already talked to, but let me just explain this from a little bit different perspective. So there's this thought among founders that I need to scale, I need to show scale, and they start building out a manufacturing facility to show that they can handle the sales growth that they've projected on their hockey stick pitch deck, chart. The problem with that is that full manufacturing site before smooth, forecastable sales drastically increases cash burn rate. Okay, so to build out a site, you've got a full rent for a site. You've got all the capital equipment that goes into that site. You have the entire staff you need to hire to staff that site. And if you don't have like good, smooth, forecastable sales, that giant expense could just sit there idle. So you really don't want to do too much insourcing before you've got more smooth sales. And as I mentioned on the last pitfall, capital investment can be wasted if product changes are needed. So that comes down to making big capital expenditure into a manufacturing site, into tooling, into an assembly line, before you've really proved out the design can be a waste of money because you may have to totally rework it or scrap it and make a new one. So instead, try contract manufacturing. It always seems like they charge too much. It seems like you're never going to be profitable by using a contract manufacturer, but trust me, it will be more capital efficient than insourcing early on, because they can be turned on and off. You get a big batch of orders, you can have them do a run, and then let's say you have a little bit of a lag in sales, or you're launching a new version because you're trying to work out some problems with the product. You can just stop. They can just stop and go work on other things, and you're not spending money all that time that they're idle. So even though it seems expensive on a per unit cost basis, it will be less expensive from an overall use of capital. Use low volume manufacturing methods. I know everyone loves 3D printing these days, so I don't need to pitch it too much, but there's a lot of good low volume manufacturing methods that don't require lots of tooling and can get you a working product, even though it might be too expensive from a unit cost perspective. It will get product fielded, which is really the main goal at the beginning, showing that it works, showing that people want it. And then limited or no automation. This is another one. Everyone wants to dive right into automation as soon as they can. That is one of those things where you don't want to spend money on automation until you've got your processes nailed down, because it's very difficult to make like a one-size-fits-all automation. It's usually really specific to a very proofed out process. And then always consider, here's another way to just prevent yourself from making a bad decision. Always consider amortized capital investment and cost of goods sold. So what that means, that's kind of a fancy way of saying, make sure you take the total cost of this capital that you are going to spend on something like tooling or automation and divide it by the parts that will be made with that tooling. I've seen people fool themselves by buying automation and tooling with cash from the company and then not counting that as part of the cost of the goods sold. You're just lying to yourself, or you're lying to your investors if you do that. All right. And the last pitfall I'm going to talk about today, and this is going to sound funny, but it's an over focus on profit. What do I mean here? So of course we need to have profit, right? But what happens is the founders start thinking, I need to demonstrate profitability to the investors. And that might lead them to do all the things that we've already covered today. Remember that at the beginning, you don't need to demonstrate profitability. You can forecast profitability, but you don't need to show it. What you need to show is people want your product and your product works. That's the most important thing. Later, you can show that. So we've talked about all the mistakes you can make related to this, but let's talk about what should you do instead, okay? Remember that proof of revenue is not proof of profit, okay? So what investors want to see early on is they want to see that you are selling, that people want it and it's working, right? What they don't necessarily see is that it's profitable yet. These are early rounds, seed rounds, A round maybe. You can show profit forecasting. So remember I talked about should cost analysis with volume discounting. That is a perfectly acceptable analysis to put together to show how your costs will come down as you increase the volume of your sales. It's very detailed, it's very credible, and you can demonstrate profitability by forecasting it, not by throwing a bunch of cash at tooling too early. And a key thing I put here is you've got startup growth scale, right? Everyone's got different names for different rounds and phases of a startup, but let's say that I'm calling 3 phases. You're starting up, you're just kind of showing that you have a thing, that you can get some revenue for it, and that it works and people want it. And then growth, now you want to try to increase your sales. And then scale, scale is where you're showing profitability or you're increasing profitability. So you don't need to do it all at once. Remember, at the beginning, you need something that works and that you can demonstrate there's a market for. So stay focused on that. And another thing, disconnect pricing analysis from COGS. So this is another thing, I didn't mention it on the last slide, but when you're over-focused on profitability, what happens is you start thinking, okay, this is what my product costs. I need to show that I make at least 10% margin. So you take your COGS, you mark it up by 10%, and you set a price. If that price is not appropriate for the product in that market, it's not going to sell. You won't sell it. And so you've got to price things based on a market analysis, not on what it costs you to make. It's your job to take those costs and shrink them later. So anyway, that's the last pitfall that I plan to talk about today. I know I kind of went fast through a lot of topics, but I hope you found that useful, and I'm happy to take any questions.
We do have a couple of questions in there, and then I'm going to turn it over to some questions in the room, if we have any. The first one from Jed. What if your company develops and manufactures a product to incorporate into your own facilities and resell directly via your own company? No distributor, no middleman. Is traction with only customers viable at this point? And you know, we can ask for clarification if you want, Peter. You can also read it in the comments if you want. So,
yeah, that's a good question. I accidentally jumped. So when you map it out, if you represent a certain number of those categories, then you know what you need. You got to ship it cheaply, or if you're distributing, you've got warehousing costs and all that. So it's really just finding out the people that aren't you and making sure you understand them. And then the only other thing, I don't know the specifics of this company and where the question's coming from, but I would just caution startups on trying to do too many things. Focus on what no one else does. And if there's other people doing it, maybe try to get them into that value chain. But I don't know the specifics there. But I would say, yes, if you represent multiple categories in that whole map, then that's fine. You know what you need. Make sure you identify the ones you don't know.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. Jed, feel free to add context to that, or let us know if that was answered, and we can return to it to flesh it out a bit more. From Robert, he just made a comment. I was taught by the president in the aerospace industry, solar panels for satellites, DFMAATS, designed for manufacturability, assembly, test, and service. He loves it.
Yeah, those are two letters I didn't mention, but that's great. The idea is that all of those things that cost money from getting the product, from an idea to out the door and usable, you think about those and you try to design. That's great.
Yeah, okay, so we have a hardware product for solar that uses steel. So I designed parts with the contractor, available profiles, et cetera, to minimize tooling costs and needs and to allow manufacturing anywhere, especially if overseas projects request local content. Also, I see value to grow by inviting the users, buyers, and installers of this product to join us, invest in us, so those few big players will have future savings. Does this work? So it sounds like Robert's kind of trying to get stakeholders or people within the value chain to buy in personally to kind of see if they can get some value from that. Does this work?
I mean, that's a complicated. I don't know enough to really give you good advice there. I have worked under conditions where local labor content is highly desirable. In those cases, I have still used contract manufacturers, but just found ones, locally in country. But it's hard for me to give you advice. I just don't know enough about it.
Gotcha. Well, appreciate the honesty there. From Robert again, in which actually say, okay, excellent. I have a solar hardware product the size of a 747 wingspan that are deploying on solar farms. And a couple of components about that. Would love your help. And we are a startup with a better mousetrap, true savings to users, and all. I'm looking for growth. Robert, feel free to connect with Peter on LinkedIn and reach out to him. He's of course happy to help in our ecosystem.
Absolutely. The word that comes to mind right away when I hear that: modularize, factory assemble, field integrate. But anyway.
All righty. Peter, thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Alex Medick, and welcome to my conversation, which kind of rolls nicely into the one we just heard from Peter, but mine's coming from more of a tech app startup background. And so my conversation is product viability, the art of the MVP. So about me, I'm Alex Medick. I'm a dad, an entrepreneur, raised here in Las Vegas. I actually went to Gorman here, and I went out to LA for a couple of years to go to school and do the startup thing. That ended up, when remote work happened, ability to work anywhere, I kind of came back to Vegas, and here I am back home. For my career, my official job title, I guess, is president of Inside.com. But in reality, what I do is I work with Jason Calacanis, who some of you might know as a notable angel investor from the All In podcast, Launch, This Week in Startups. And I actually work with him to build startup products. So that is kind of my world, my foray into the world of product management and building. So there's something you should know about me. And I actually didn't grow up with a traditional product background. I never had the dreams of being, hey, let's go build cool tech that people could use. I actually grew up in a marketing background because I'm good at public speaking. I can talk to folks. I grew up with sales in the blood, kind of always going there. So I actually grew up in the growth hacking digital marketing experience. And with growth hacking, my career has literally been helping companies, specifically startups, SMBs, get started scaling as fast as humanly possible while being as scrappy as humanly possible. If you, I think one reason my clients used to love me when I worked as a consultant freelancer is that I never asked for extraordinary budgets. I was like, all right, what's the biggest bang for my buck I can get for as little as humanly possible? So for me, the transition to PM wasn't all that crazy. I came from a growth hack experience. So I took all my experiences of being scrappy, lessons learned through testing, iteration, using the scientific process, the scientific method, and I actually brought them into the PM world. PM stands for product management, in case anyone doesn't know. So there's a fancy way to describe what we're doing, and this is what probably most of my product peers would talk to you about, is using the fancy terms. We can cut all the marketing bullshit. We can call ourselves super fancy. We're super fancy entrepreneurs here, guys. We know better than others. We want to build new products. So we can tell everyone right now, we're actually learning about how to uncover product market viability through the lean MVP, build, test, and iterate methodology. Whoa, that sounds so fancy. Go impress people. Tell that to your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, and they'll be like, wow, you were smart. But here's really what we're doing. We're talking about the art of the MVP and where do we go from there. And the MVP, we'll get into it, but here's my question, I guess, is when you ask me how much you should start to build your product, how much should you spend turning your idea into a product? My answer is as little as humanly possible. Now you say, Alex, how much is as little as humanly possible? Is it 20,000? Is it 30,000? If it's people I've spoken to in the past, I've said, well, set aside 50,000 budget. And I say, hell no, that is crazy to me. If you are just in the ideation stage, going from idea to product, you should be spending less than $1,000 to at least get your MVP off the ground and be able to have a successful V1 test or V0.1 test and do some solid user research on that one. So an MVP, a minimum viable product. That's what the world calls it. Everyone in Silicon Valley says, oh, do you have your MVP? Here's what it really is. It's really slapping together what you probably imagine is the worst possible version of your product. It's the most basic iteration, and the goal is to get out there in a tangible way where you can get people to use it, gather feedback, then use that feedback to shortcut your startup and kick some damn ass, which is all what we're trying to do in the product world. Hallelujah. Let's get everyone there and let's mitigate as much loss as possible. So a lot of these principles, if you are into reading and you want to tell people you read this book by Eric Ries, a lot of these principles were founded by Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup, which is all about building a startup with as little capital as possible to be able to rapidly scale, iterate, and just have the best chance for success out there. So let's go over the key characteristics of what a minimum viable product is. And that is, first, you need basic functionality. By the way, after we go over these characteristics, I will give you some specific examples, so you just don't think I'm giving out some random jargon from Eric Ries over here. But anyway, key characteristics of an MVP is, first, you have your basic functionality. You want to get the minimum set of features required. Less is more. Keep it simple, straightforward. If you have an idea, here, very relevant. Twitter right now is just changed to X. X is the everything app. If you want to go to market with the everything app, you will fail. You build something for everyone, you build for no one. Start small, start as basic and frictionless as possible, and then grow from there. Another goal with an MVP is when you start off as small as possible and as minimal as possible, you get to focus on what the quickest and best and most effective iteration of development is on this. So if you just want to build, I can give you an example of an app that I'll actually dig you guys at in a little bit, but really just build the basic version and get there quickly. Don't overthink. Can someone use this? Will they get the idea of it? Will it be the best, most polished product? Hell no. Is it going to be a great first step though? Absolutely, especially if you're just about to test your idea. So another important part of this, which I find people forget all the time, it's not just about being scrappy when you build your product. It's actually about collecting user feedback. If you don't collect user feedback, all this other stuff doesn't matter. Might as well just go spend the $30,000 to build your product and blow it all and figure out, oh, that failed, what's next? The point of this is to, one, save money on development costs, but also get early users in and feel like and test your hypothesis of what the user experience is like and what the outcomes are, and test that against what people are actually experiencing with the app or product, whatever you're creating. So it's about getting user feedback. And then we are doing an iterative approach with this. Part of a lean startup is it's about being fast, cheap, getting information, being able to go quickly and iterate. So if I start making a product and I spend all this time doing something and people start telling me, the customers start telling me, oh, the button should be blue, not yellow. Then it's like, okay, if I spend all this money, I have to go get devs to go in, blah, blah, blah. But if it's something really simple I did myself, or I had a small team do, the really cheap version, changing that button color is going to be really quick and simple for just for your users to start seeing the iteration you want and actually start getting rid of some of those friction points that your customers are telling you about. And then please don't forget that an MVP is really here for learning. We're using the scientific method here, which I'm going to sound so dumb trying to remember what the scientific method is off the top of my head right now, but it's really, you have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you prove if it's right, and if you have a good theory, you keep going down. What's the next testing you're doing? If you're proven wrong, go back and start from ground zero. In a nutshell, that's what we're doing. We're using this as a learning tool. We're validating our ideas. We're seeing if there's a taste from the market for what you're offering and what your idea is. And then we're going to iterate as fast as possible to get a polished product out there to start going to the masses. So I'm going to give you some examples of an MVP. And this is one I'm actually working on today, what I've spent my morning actually testing, because I just downloaded the very first version in Test Flight, which is, you've never used Test Flight before. It's the Apple App Store for all beta apps is what they use. It's a private thing. You can invite it so you can test apps on your phone without having it and be in the App Store for the world. Anyway, this example I'm going to give you is a little more different than starting an MVP from scratch like most of you might be doing, because I actually did this as part of an entrepreneurial activity. So there was already a core business happening, and the CEO had a thesis of a product, and I helped him. And right now what I'm doing is I'm building out that thesis, building on MVP, testing and experimenting with that product, rapid iteration, and seeing if his hypothesis is correct and where this will help take his business in the future. So here's this one I'm working on right this second, which I don't want to name company names just because it's not out there in the public yet. But the thesis was, can I get AI replicate the work of the writers at a company to complete their tasks faster and at a comparable quality? So this company, they employ 20, 30 folks to produce a certain amount of work, and the boss, the CEO of the company said, well, can I get AI to do what these employees are doing? If so, that would have these cost savings, it could equal this expansion, et cetera. So here I am testing this hypothesis for him before he spends a bunch of money to make moves on this. So the first thing I did was I studied a lot of prompt engineering, and I went through and I took his idea, said, all right, here's the quality of what you're currently getting as a product. Can I replicate even a slight version of this using ChatGPT 3.5? That's what was available at the time, which is why I used it. So I went to OpenAI's API platform, started running these API experiments, and I was actually able to get similar qualities between what his current employees were doing and what AI could do. Like, okay, your hypothesis makes sense. I could actually have a machine do what the human is doing. Then now I can't tell, but maybe I'm a little too close to this. Can a regular user tell? So what I actually started doing is I took a small sample set from his current customer base, and I incorporated my AI written work and mixed it in with what his current employees are doing. And with this, the users or the customers of this, they couldn't actually tell the difference between what a human was doing and what a robot was doing. And I found this out through surveys. Actually, this is actually one of my favorite surveys I've ever done, is where I wrote the people in the small sample set said, hey, we actually ran an experiment seeing if you could get one of these stories as AI. They didn't know that 3 out of 7 stories was written by AI in this product. I said, one of these was written by AI. Can you tell me which one was the one written by AI? Not a single person got the correct answer out of the sample set of 1,000. And I was like, okay, now we're on to something here. So that was my testing of a hypothesis of what my client wanted to do. He wanted to see if he could AI replicate humans instead of spending a bunch of money trying to build out a dev team to build this product and bring it to market and see if it would work. I said, hey, give me 3 weeks. Let me test this and iterate it. Let me work to some prompt engineering and let me just do a small sample test. And let's just see if this even can be done. And now that that's done, we're actually building into a curator. It's actually going into this massive product that is really big. We have a lot of people on our beta wait list, but that's actually an example of an MVP. Instead of making these big, outrageous bets and betting the farm on something, I wanted to test, experiment, and mitigate any risk of failure as much as humanly possible, because time and effort and money are all extremely valuable resources. Why waste them if we have? Why waste them if we don't have to? So outside of this, not everyone here is probably building a mobile app or some weird tech Silicon Valley startup firm. So I wanted to give you some other examples of MVP types I've done in the past, which is instead of building a community, a lot of people say, Alex, I want to build a community. I need a proprietary CMS with whatever engagement rating tools and all this nonsense. No, you don't. Go start a free Slack instance. Invite 5 folks that fit your user persona and see if you can get them to really engage in community. If you can get those 5 to do it, become lovers of your product, then go get another 5 and see if you keep expanding on this mix. And that can be your quick test iteration where all it takes is your time, not your money. Selling a t-shirt, this is what I did for a friend of mine. I actually, instead of him putting all this money to build out his Shopify store, start paying monthly fees, start putting product out there, actually just went to Canva, made a mock design of the t-shirt he was doing, slapped it on a free Notion public site with a type form I think I used. And I said, we're selling this shirt. It's going to be $19.99. Place pre-orders now. Once he actually got to 20 pre-orders, he said, all right, that's enough of a market validation and the revenue already there because people put in their credit card. So he already had the market validation that people would buy this. They are willing to buy it. This price point's okay. Then we actually ended up launching that product. And then a third example that I worked on last year, or that's 2 years ago now, geez, was it's actually a product called Get Cuppy. Or Cuppy, go to getcuppy.com. I invested in this company, disclaimer, because I loved it. I use it all the time. But it's a buddy of mine. And sorry, all clients are friends of mine, I guess. It was a client of mine at the time. But he had an idea for a like a water bottle drying rack that was just a little minimal thing you stuck on your counter and helped you dry your water bottles faster. And I was looking at his startup expense costs, and between molds, manufacturing in China, shipping to America, printing all this out, he was getting the $40,000 range. So what we ended up doing was we went to a 3D printer and we said, hey, this is the exact tool he's trying to make. Can you make us a really shitty 3D printed version of this? And the guy said, absolutely. 3D printer gave us 50 of these cuppies. We handed these out to a bunch of beta testers and we saw, hey, do people like this product? How are they using this product? And we did surveys with all of them. We sat down, we did like the must-have survey. If you ever look up what the must-have survey is, we did the must-have survey. We watched them use it. We just did countless research and we figured out what the price point is, what people were willing to pay for this, and how they would even describe the product. So once we found our validation of what the use case is, what the language our customers or potential customers are going to use to build this, buy this product, that's how we ended up making all the marketing collateral, built up the real official product, and now that product is doing, I think, 30,000 MRR, and they just started actually going to market last year, so it's a lot of fun. But those are 3 examples of minimum viable products where we dropped the $50,000 range. I did everything for less than $1,000. I think Cuppy was actually the most expensive one because I paid for 3D models. The rest of these other 2, I think I spent maybe an hour of my time and $5 on the tech. But that's the point of an MVP. You're trying to get validation for your idea, which is fantastic. This part is where everyone misses the MVP. You can build cheap products. Everyone can build a cheap product. It's about getting feedback. If you don't listen to your customers, you must like failing. That's the end of the story. Listen to your customers. If they all tell you that this button color sucks, this user experience is horrible, listen to them, figure it out. People are simple. People want simple. Everyone in my life, I always talk to everyone about product this. People should flow. There should be no friction at all. People should just like the water, just glide on through the river and go exactly where you need them to go without thinking. If someone has to stop and think, we have a problem on our hands because people are not great at thinking. We want them to go. That sounds very cold and callous. I meant it to sound cold and callous on purpose, but that's the moral of the story. People want simple and frictionless. So feedback, I do want to say this with a caveat though. Feedback is crucial, but it's also important. You're the founder here. You're the entrepreneur. You're the person building this product. You have to be able to use your feedback, combined with your own intuition and your vision of where you want the product to go, and other variables like you can see what competitors are doing in the market. You know what the landscape is, the vertical you're looking in. Not everyone is going to know exactly what's great for the product, but you can take user feedback and mix it with your own intuition and whatever learnings you have in the past and figure out how to make the best path forward for everyone. I always like to say, as Henry Ford always said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, which is true. So it's people always ask yourself why. What's the end goal of what the person's doing? Sometimes people might say, oh, I think this needs a step here to help me get to here. But the real problem is they're trying to get to X. I look at it like, what was the thing I learned in business school? It was people don't buy a drill because they want to drill something. They just want a damn hole in the wall. So what we're trying to do is figure out what that opportunity is and how to create that frictionless experience to get someone from A to their desired experience. So not everyone wants to get a drill and a nail and make the hole in the wall. So how do we help them get those two steps? And what's your process in helping someone get there? So sometimes you have to ask yourself a lot, what are folks actually asking for with this? What's the deeper problem here? Always ask what, why, how, what's the bigger picture, and think beyond just the immediate response you're getting. That's huge when it comes to customer feedback. Listen, we're all going to be hamsters on a wheel on this one. This is a little diff. I don't think it's playing right now. Oh, there you go. Little hamster, people on a treadmill right now. This is what we're doing. When you're in a startup, when you're building a product, it's all about test, iterate, repeat. Test, iterate, repeat. And this goes on even to when your product is massive. Look at Instagram. When they roll a new feature out, they don't roll out to the entire world all at once. They still do subsegments of users. They do things with creators. They'll do things with only certain geographical regions, only certain user experience. Like if they see a behavior, like DMs are being used more in, I don't know, Australia, they're going to test out new DM beta tools in Australia before they do it in America because they want to go where it's going to be highly used and highly valuable. Even, what's the new product they just launched? They just launched Threads. Threads, their Twitter/X competitor, they didn't roll that out to the whole world in one day. It was the fastest growing social app of all time, 100 million users in 4 days. They could have rolled it out to the whole world, but they still wanted to take their time and experiment. So they rolled it out with only a select few countries. The US was one of them. They saw what user feedback was like, and now they're iterating. They expanded on the airs. They listened to customer feedback, and now they're expanding to other places in the world. So even the big boys do this. It's not just made for us little startup founders and entrepreneurs. Keep testing, iterating, repeating. Find your small subsegments and test, iterate, repeat with this, and listen to your customers. And that will help you have the most viable, best user experience product out there. I will give these with caveats though. Here are 5 things you should not do when doing your MVP and building. God, I have fallen for this first one more times than I care to admit because I always tell myself it's going to be different. It's never different. Do not use friends and family for testing, please. Everyone, they're either going to be 2 ways. They're going to be so kind and just will smoke up your ass about how great your idea is and how good you are, what a genius everything is. Or they're going to tell you, they're going to be the harshest critic you've ever had in your life and not give you a fair fight. They're going to tell you, this sucks. Why would you waste your time with this? And you'll be so morally defeated. Just don't even bother. Go find people that are actually like your buying audience. Don't go for the easy wins by saying, hey, sister, hey, brother, please go test out my new app or my new product. No, go find people that are actually like that fit in your user demographic. DM folks on Twitter. excuse me, find people on Facebook groups. Just go find your actual audience. So number two, don't add too many features at once. If you add too much at once, you will not be able to understand what you're actually testing. If you are like, hey, I made changes to this X, Y, and Z, well, what are users supposed to actually give you feedback on? Their brains can't really handle all that much. The average individual really can't handle that much new information being thrown at them. So keep things simple. If you want to test one variation, that's what you should do. Never test two or more things at once. That gets too complicated and you're going to fail and you're going to lose out on the user experience with that. Number three, ignoring user feedback. I've seen people say, I've heard the customer, but I know I'm right. I'm going with my gut on this. I'm going with my gut. Listen, you've gone this far in life because you have a good intuition and a good gut. But at the end of the day, too, you're not the one buying your product. They are. So you have to give the people what they want to some degree. So listen to your user feedback. They are smart. They are your customer. They're the ones pulling out the pocketbook for you. So you got to make sure you listen to them. Number four is not setting clear goals. When you're building your product, what are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to test? What do you actually want to know from this? Set clear goals with every iteration you do and every experiment you run. And then the last one, I've fallen for this so many times too, especially earlier in my career, but it's death by analysis paralysis. And that is studying so much, constantly want to have the data so perfect, because I know people that are very data-driven and people that are very creative, intuition-driven. You got to find a way to merge the two worlds together, because if you're too creative and driven by your gut, you're going to have a hard time. If you're too data-driven, you're going to miss the life, the heartbeat, and the nuance that goes in within your product. And you're just going to keep saying, oh no, one more test, one more feature, one more thing, and you just actually never launch. Now, if we don't ever launch, what the hell is any of this for? So you've gone through all this shenanigans. Now V2, what now? Keep going. Listen to user feedback. Add a dash of your own intuition and enhance the second version. Remove user friction. Keep testing, keep polishing, keep talking to users and customers. Never stop talking to users and customers. Even if a product, here, inside.com, where I've helped build up that whole product from the ground up, where I'm president of, even though I'm president, we have a team of community people under me. There's an army of individuals below my layer to try to stop folks from even touching me. But if a customer gets a hold of me, sends me an email, sends me a DM, whatever, I value their time. I appreciate them. And I actually go and respond to everyone. I always ask for feedback. I jump in one-on-one interviews at least once a month with I try to do 3 to 5 one-on-one interviews a month, just because I always want to hear how people are experiencing the product, what they're going through, and what I can make better. So you're never too busy or too big. Brian Chesky from Airbnb, if you email him, I've cold emailed him a few times. If you cold email him and ask him about Airbnb or talk about product, he will actually get back to you. He got back to me within 20 minutes. It was phenomenal. And he's a busy guy, busier than I am. And if he can do it, you can do it. So just keep talking to customers. Don't lose that flow. Also, as the founder, CEO, whatever you want to call yourself, establishing that relationship with customers, that will help drive that, I guess what they call it, user advocacy, customer advocacy, to where they're going to be like, oh, I just talked to Alex. He's awesome. I actually have more of a connection with this company now. I'm going to tell other people how awesome this company is or this product is because of X. So just don't lose that communication touch point. Keep momentum going. Momentum's everything. The second you hesitate or you get sidetracked or you kind of start going, it's scope creep. Every time you get scope creep in your life, whether stay mission focused, if things start creeping in, you start getting sidetracked with the core mission, it's going to get harder. Things are going to hit brakes. You're going to stumble across roadblocks. Have a clear mission, clear goal, set clear values, and just stay singularly focused on conquering your mission. What is focus? The analogy of focus is following one course until success. Stay focused. With that, that is kind of the introduction to minimum viable products. I know most of you here are manufacturing or physical good. I kind of talked more about the tech side of things and how you get an MVP going, but any questions, let me know.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. That was really excellent. How should people get in touch with you? Connect on LinkedIn, or do you have a different way of getting in touch with you?
Do not hit me up on LinkedIn. That is a DM graveyard for me. AJM@hey.com, if you want to put that in the chat. AJM@hey.com. That's my personal email. Or you can always email me at alex@insight.com. But I'm pretty responsive.
Just more comments.
Bueller. All right.
Well, hey, as it closes up, if there are any last questions, let me know. But again, Alex, that was really appreciated. Well, I mean, one of the major things we as an organization try to feed into young entrepreneurs' heads is MVP. Founders fall in love with their products, their baby, and they'll just over engineer and care for it way too much, and then they get heartbroken when they bring it out there. So that's just a great. I know these things, and it's one thing to know it, but actually executing on it is so hard, because I fall in the same traps where I have great ideas and I love it so much. I'm like, it's going to be perfect for the world of you. But hey, people are actually pretty forgiving of smaller hiccups as long as you iterate quickly, solve their problems, and keep going. Yeah.
All right, everyone. So I'll just go ahead and start it. But again, thank you, Alex, for joining us and providing that. So next week on August 3rd, we will be having a session on fundraising types and outreach to investors with our very own Jeff Sailing. Founder University now has an online portal that covers all these topics. They'll have these sessions on there and the speakers in their sessions. And you can, Founder University registrants will gain access to this. So please reach out to us if you've not received access to that. It's available for the community. And also a reminder, all attendees that are able to attend at least 70 sessions will be eligible for StartUpNV to help you build out your deal room. I may have miscommunicated this a little bit in last session. Your deal room is really important when you are starting to go or consider going out to investors. It's where you put everything that's under the hood about your venture, the things that the investors need to know about, such as your deck, your cap table financials, other, customer agreements, other information, business license, and other information that they may need. So it's very important to have this in a organized and deliverable manner, ready to deploy whenever an investor asks for that information. So this is also the reason why we encourage you to register or get a ticket for every single event that we come to, or let us know you've attended if you're in person. We do track attendance, and this is how we can look into those things. Thank you all for joining us. We will let you get going now, and please reach out to Alex if you guys have any additional questions, and we will see you next week.